But some of you that have been watching me for a long time, you remember the phrase, I have not said it in a couple of years, the intellectual dark web. This was a group of people sort of when I was kind of getting popular way back when I was one of the first sort of outside of mainstream people, building a studio in my garage, sitting down with people across the political divide, whether they were Sam Harris on the left, or Ben Shapiro on the right, just talking it out, having debates about God and having debates about the role of government, all of these things. The thing kind of blew up. This was obviously related to Joe Rogan as well, and a whole bunch of people. But it was the point of it was we were going to defend free speech, and we were going to try to get over some of the right versus left insanity. I sense it's reforming. It's retaking shape.
Hello, everyone, once again from the Tory hellhole of the United Kingdom, and today we are talking about something we all thought was dead, but now it's come back. It's the intellectual dark web 2.0. Now, any YouTuber who's been around as long as I have, that sounds weird to say now, but I did start my channel at the start of 2018, you have covered someone from the intellectual dark web, and if you're on the left, you've obviously criticized them. So what was the intellectual dark web? It was basically a collection of people viewed as intellectuals from across like various different political backgrounds. I wouldn't say the political spectrum because there wasn't really any real leftists there, but you had Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Brett Weinstein, you had Dave Rubin, who we're going to talk about a lot today, and of course you had people like Sam Harris, but this no longer exists anymore. Like, these people do not collaborate as much. They've kind of like segmented off. And of course, Jordan Peterson now works for Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, but Sam Harris has basically like ran off. He doesn't even use Twitter anymore. And he's sort of the main critic of his stuff. And what the old intellectual dark web used to unite around was the attack on free speech from the so-called illiberal left, and we'd shut down Jordan Peterson for basically saying making him use pronouns is like Stalin's gulags. We'd shut down Mara Yiannopoulos speaking at a college campus. We'd try and cancel all these people, and we wouldn't talk about things seriously. We wouldn't talk about Islam seriously, and that's what united a lot of these people. They absolutely hated Muslims, and they hated Islam. Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, pretty much all these people were united by this fact. But then we also had people who I guess weren't intellectuals, but kind of brought these people together, and that was Joe Rogan as well, because Joe Rogan had a podcast all these people featured on, often together. So he was like the hub of the old intellectual dark web. But as you all know, in American politics now, fear-mongering about Islam isn't really relevant these days. And even last week, I covered in my video, a lot of Republicans now feel like Muslims in the US can actually be helpful in getting their agenda passed because they view Islam as anti-woke. So the intellectual dark web 2.0 has some of the same members, but a lot of new ones. And what are they all united by now? They're basically just all united by all being anti-vaxxers to some degree. And that is pretty much the main thing that unifies these people. Yeah, if you actually listen to a lot of them, they pretty much do say the same stuff. But instead of the leftist attack on free speech and Islam, it's now COVID vaccines. And of course, that's where we're at with the so-called intellectual dark web. Some people have been cast out. Ben Shapiro doesn't seem to be in this anymore. Sam Harris would never have anything to do with this. It's part of the reason he distanced himself from all these people, which we're going to talk about later, is because they just became Trumpist, anti-vax grifters. And for all his faults, Sam Harris has never supported Donald Trump and is pro-science in some ways, apart from when he's platforming Charles Murray and saying the bell curve actually has some merits. So today what I wanted to do is just look at the intellectual dark web 2.0 and contrast it with the downfall of the original intellectual dark web. So before we go any further, please like the video. Please let me know, who do you think the worst original intellectual dark web grifter was? Maybe Jordan Peterson, and it's just funny to see his downfall because he has no respectability anymore because he's absolutely unhinged these days. but let me know down in the comments. Also, follow me on social media at the Kavernacle, on Twitter, on Threads, on Instagram, on Blue Sky. Also, consider becoming a patron. I'm trying to build up as many $1 to $3 patrons as possible. Benefits include access to the Discord server, access to exclusive content I've posted already, and access to my Nintendo Switch friend code. And also check out my second channel and my subreddit. The links to all of these things down in the description. So we're going to talk about the original intellectual dark web if you're kind of confused like what this really was. But I hope I've given you like a brief outline in the intro. But let's get into what inspired this video. So Dave Rubin put out this tweet, and he also put out a video on Rumble, not on YouTube, because I think it's about vaccines and stuff. But anyway, let's talk about this. So Dave Rubin tweets the other day, seems there is a new intellectual dark web brewing in the fight to save America from the machine. So think about who's left off the list and think of the new people. So we have Tucker Carlson, we have Jordan Peterson, a returning member of the original intellectual dark web. We have Bill Maher, who of course was kind of in that crowd to begin with, always platforming Sam Harris and stuff. We have Joe Rogan, again, a returning member. Now we also have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Brett Weinstein is back as well. Now we also have Russell Brand too. I don't know who this guy is, but I know he wasn't in the original one, so David Sachs. Then we also have Glenn Greenwald. We also now have Ice Cube apparently too. And we have Ron DeSantis and a guy called Jay Bhattacharya. Don't know who that last person is. So we have some new members. Give you a couple seconds to think about this. I read you out all those names and think about the ones you recognize. Like, what unites them all recently? It's COVID vaccine, either skepticism or flat out just like being an anti-vaxxer, right? Like Robert F. Kennedy or, you know, some of these other people. People who say they haven't taken the vaccine, because I think out of all of these people, I don't know one who actually has taken it. Maybe Jordan Peterson. And these days, even though we all know Tucker Carlson definitely has taken it, he says he hasn't as well. But we pretty much know this is just a grift, and he has. And this links in nicely from my video I made the other day about Ben Shapiro and why they were turning on Ben Shapiro because he's vaccinated and promoted the vaccine, right? So now all these people are uniting around one thing, basically. COVID skepticism and all the conspiracy theories that go along with that. And also you can throw in there like completely against supporting Ukraine, obviously hating Joe Biden, and pretty much wrapped up in that is most of them, not all of them, think Donald Trump is some sort of anti-establishment force. But then we also have some sort of divide there with the Ron DeSantis stuff, because a lot of these people like Donald Trump, but they prefer Ron DeSantis as kind of either anti-establishment because he was against COVID mandates and masks and stuff like that, which loads of these people love. That's basically what unites all these people, like a vague notion of the anti-establishment only in regards to coronavirus and stuff like that. So there was a video recently of Ice Cube driving Tucker Carlson around, and that's all they spoke about. And Dave Rubin covered it, and here's Dave Rubin in his own words saying all this stuff. I have about 5 minutes of his like 50-minute video saved. I'll probably play you about maybe 3 minutes of it. I'll edit out the parts that aren't relevant, but let's watch this together and then discuss the new intellectual dark web that Dave Rubin is hoping to lead, create. Let's listen.
But some of you that have been watching me for a long time, you remember the phrase, I have not said it in a couple of years, the intellectual dark web. I sense it's reforming. It's retaking shape. It's not for me to coin the new term, let's say, the new intellectual dark web. We could probably, Eric Weinstein actually came up with that. But this thing where Russell Brand is talking to DeSantis and Tucker Carlson is talking to Ice Cube and Bill Maher is talking to Jordan Peterson, et cetera, it's starting to take form and take shape, and it's bigger than politics. Tucker Carlson, who, as you know, no longer with Fox, he's doing his solo thing. Unclear where he will fully end up. He's putting them on Twitter for now. Sounds like he might be building some sort of media empire. We shall see. He sat down or in a car. He took a drive with Ice Cube, rapper Ice Cube. Here are Tucker and Ice Cube talking about why Ice Cube did not get the vaccine.
Why wouldn't you take the vax? You had a direct order to take it. You were told to take it.
Yeah, I'm not real good with direct orders, but on a whole nother note,
But it was a command.
I didn't.
I mean, I'm sorry, they told you. I mean, they couldn't have been clearer about
Yeah,
it.
it was pretty clear. Did you take it?
Of course not.
Yeah, no. It wasn't ready. You know, it was 6 month, kind of rush job. There's no repercussions if they're wrong, but I get all the repercussions if they're wrong.
Was it a tough call for you?
No, it wasn't a tough call. I wanted to be an example for my kids. Really make sure they didn't take it either. Show them that I wanted to stand on my convictions and that I was willing, to lose $9 million and more, because we've probably lost more, since then.
This isn't specifically about the vax, although it's interesting now to find out that there were a whole bunch of people who privately weren't getting vaxxed. Some people did it a little bit more publicly, whatever it might be. But the bigger idea that people weren't just swallowing the narrative, that people were saying, oh, the machine wants us to do this and it wants to put mandates down. And it used 2 weeks ago was saying my body, my choice. Now it wants to force you to do things. And it wants you, just because you work for somebody, that person should be able to force you to be injected, all that stuff. And a lot of people got red-pilled because of it. Now, I have no doubt that Tucker Carlson and Ice Cube probably have wide disagreements, perhaps on borders and all sorts of political stuff. But this goes to the new thing that is taking shape right in front of us. And I think that all of us that care about freedom and free speech and decency and living in a country with people that are different from us and all of that stuff, we can help shape it right now, right? We can be the people with the clay that are doing the thing, and that would be pretty good, okay? So if they're sort of on that same team, what is that same team? It seems to be somewhat pro-truth, right? It doesn't just swallow what the narrative is. It's definitely somewhat anti-woke. My guess is Ice Cube's got some woke stuff within him, but it's more anti-machine. It's showing you that politics is not the end-all, be-all.
So I find that hilarious for various reasons. I also love that he's saying Ice Cube is woke, probably just because he's black. Because Ice Cube might be like woke in that he said some stuff about the police and racism, but he's not really woke when it comes to like this vaccine stuff or promoting anti-Semitism and stuff like that. Like, I feel like Dave Rubin doesn't actually know much about him and is just assuming like because he's black, he must be like woke or scared his audience will see him that way. Anyway, I find it weird. Also, another note on Dave Rubin, I just realized why someone like Ben Shapiro might not be included and why Dave Rubin is hoping this new grift takes off is because a lot of these people aren't religious. So they don't hate him for being a gay conservative. But Ben Shapiro said to his face he wouldn't even come to like a dinner party celebrating his marriage. Loads of conservatives turned against Dave Rubin because he's a dad now, right? So what I'm thinking of Dave Rubin as someone who likes to pivot around, he was firmly in bed with MAGA during the Donald Trump presidency. And now Ron DeSantis became more prominent. He's switched and now he supports DeSantis, right? And he feels like a less religious influenced Republican Party, because Donald Trump, despite, obviously not being religious, is massively backed by evangelicals and stuff. He feels like that's better for him, I think, personally. And lots of people he listed there, I don't think would have much of a problem personally with him being a gay married man with children. But when you have the religious right and Ben Shapiro and all those people, they definitely do have a problem with that. So I feel like that is another pivot on Dave's part and maybe one he feels more comfortable in. But also, like, he doesn't actually believe the framing of, Russell Brand is talking to Ron DeSantis. And, like, the ordinary person thinks, oh, my God, I have so much more in common with the right than I realize. Because in terms of the cultural stuff, we don't have much in common. But we do often have stuff in common with the class stuff. And so do these people, right? But it's nothing the average person can relate to. All these people he listed are very wealthy people who can get along despite their maybe social differences to talk about some political agreements because they all have a class interest. And most of them are grifters or culture war warriors. So that's why the collection makes sense. And they're just staking their claim on being like anti-vaccine. Like, that's literally it. The new intellectual dark web all revolves around not getting vaccinated. And Dave Rubin talking about like not swallowing the narrative. Like, is that intellectual, right? Is it just like being an intellectual is being a contrarian? Like every medical agency across the world telling you that medicine stops you from getting sick and decreasing your chance of dying, they all just must be lying. And hundreds of years of medical science, was it like the late 1700s when the first rabies vaccine was made in France and American children went over to get it? Like, that's all wrong. You're swallowing the narrative if you believe that. In my point of view, it is this grift and this cross-pollination. And like I said in my Russell Brand video last week, they just like him as a token lefty, as Dave Rubin's doing right there, saying, oh, Russell Brand is now promoting Ron DeSantis. How mind-blowing is that? And it's like, it's not mind-blowing if you know anything about Russell Brand's content right now and how much of a shameless grifter he is. It's not mind-blowing. And Russell Brand is like the worst grifter because he personally doesn't even believe most of his stuff. He's just doing it for a paycheck and ego. He was striking with NHS workers recently, but then he has a fascist governor on his show talking about how great he is, right? That's clearly not Russell Brand's like personal politics. He's doing that because he's employed by Rumble and he's a grifter and he wants to make money. So the intellectual dark web is somehow even more intellectually bankrupt than the original intellectual dark web. And that's the one thing I will say actually, is as much as I hate the original intellectual dark web, I do believe it wasn't a shameless grift, in that I think a lot of these people did sincerely believe in this kind of like very liberal view of, oh, we should talk about our differences. We're so much better than everyone. We talk about God and philosophy, and it's a place we can come together and do this and fight against Islam and the illiberal left together because we're against illiberalism and we're pro Western values and Western chauvinism, right? Where with this group of people, there's not really much kind of ideologically uniting them besides we don't want to take the vaccine and we'll grift off that, right? Like, why is Ron DeSantis in that? Like, he doesn't strike me as an intellectual. He's not very charismatic. Like, why is he there? And then, like, why is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in there to be this token guy? But again, it's because he's anti-vax. That is literally it. But now let's talk about the original intellectual dark web and how the downfall of that kind of predicted what would come afterwards, meaning like what Sam Harris is criticizing people was saying, and Dave Rubin has talked about this as well. This original article by Barry Weiss, of all people, of course, in the New York Times, is kind of how this whole intellectual dark web framing like took shape. And I just want to read some of it for you now. Here are some things that you will hear when you sit down to dinner with the vanguard of the intellectual dark web. There are fundamental biological differences between men and women. Obviously, Jordan Peterson started his internet grift with the transphobia. Free speech is under siege. Identity politics is a toxic ideology that is tearing American society apart. And we're in a dangerous place if these ideas are considered dark. I was meeting with Sam Harris, Eric Weinstein, Dave Rubin, and their spouses in an LA restaurant talking about how they turned into heretics. A decade ago, they argued, when Donald Trump was still hosting The Apprentice, none of these observations would have been considered taboo. Almost as if society evolves and doesn't stay the same. And that's why you're conservatives, because you want it to stay the same. Most simply, it is a collection of iconoclastic thinkers, academic renegades, and media personalities who are having a rolling conversation on podcasts, YouTube and Twitter, and in sold-out auditoriums that sound unlike anything else happening, at least publicly, in the culture right now. Feeling largely locked out of legacy outlets, they are rapidly building their own mass media channels. The closest thing to a phone book for the IDW is a sleek website, and this website is like basically completely dead and seems to be for sale now, that lists the persona of the network, including Mr. Harris, Mr. Weinstein, and his brother and sister-in-law, Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying, Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Douglas Murray, Majid Nawaz. The core members have little in common politically, but they all share three distinct qualities. First, they are willing to disagree ferociously, but talk civilly, about nearly every meaningful subject: religion, immigration, the nature of consciousness. Second, in an age in which popular feelings about the way things ought to be override facts about the way things actually are, each is determined to resist parroting what's politically convenient. And third, some have paid for this commitment by being purged from institutions that have become increasingly hostile to unorthodox thought and have found receptive audiences elsewhere. So this is interesting, and we'll talk about this a bit later with Dave Rubin. Sam Harris talks about this. Yet there are pitfalls to this audience-supported model. One risk is what Eric Weinstein has called audience capture. Since stories about left-wing outrage culture take off with their fans, members of the intellectual dark web may have a hard time resisting the urge to deliver that type of story. This probably helps explain why some people in this group talk constantly about the regressive left, but far less about the threat from the right. Sam Harris saying in this interview, "There are a few people in this network who have gone without saying anything critical about Trump, a person who has assaulted truth more than anyone in human history. If you care about truth, this is quite strange." We're going to get back to all of that a bit later. Harry Wise concluding the article saying, "I get the appeal of the IDW. I share the belief that our institutional gatekeepers need to crack the gates open much more. I don't, however, want to live in a culture where there are no gatekeepers at all. Given how influential this group is becoming, I can't be alone in hoping that IDW finds a way to issue the cranks, grifters, and bigots and sticks to truth-seeking." That was in 2018, and that clearly didn't happen. Truth-seeking was the least of their concerns, and it's pretty much all of them. And the only one who seemed to have any principles was actually Sam Harris, believe it or not, because he's the one who basically called them out at the start and has kept calling them out since, because they just all did this thing where they just grifted to the right the whole time, and they never called out conservatives. And when Donald Trump became president, they all essentially either became Trump supporters or didn't want to criticize him, like Sam Harris was actually saying to Barry Weiss in that article. So it's funny how this was all framed, these people seeking to bridge the divide, speak truth to power, and push back against the liberal left and Islam, which I didn't talk about in that article. And now what do you have today? A collection of just rando idiot anti-vaxxers. And sure, you have some of the old crew in there, but let's keep it real. People like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson had their brains like completely melted by the pandemic, right? They don't have any like goodwill or credibility from the general public. You have to be hardcore into like the far right conservative ecosystem to like these people anymore. And that's pretty much it, right? Everyone in that group, pretty much, you literally have to be far right adjacent to even like them now, because that's where the Overton window has gone with mainstream Republican politics, and they've all followed. And the pandemic was just a place where they could radicalize more people, even though Donald Trump is the guy who started Operation Warp Speed, which they all seem to forget. Now, let's go into what various members of this intellectual dark web felt about it, and felt about it basically disintegrating by, I don't know, 2021. But like I said, Sam Harris was the guy who deleted his Twitter, and he basically stopped associating with any of these people because they all went insane during the pandemic and they all started supporting Trump. And Anthony Fisher wrote a really good piece on it for the Daily Beast called "The Intellectual Dark Web's Descent into Paranoia and Trumpism," focusing on Sam Harris. I don't know how much I'm going to read. It is all really good, so let's see. But anyway, Sam Harris was one of the anti-woke media figures profiled in the much-discussed 2018 New York Times opinion feature on the intellectual dark web, which I read you. He was also one of the first of that cohort to announce his fictitious membership in the unofficial gaggle, on the grounds that he didn't want to be associated with some of his allies' COVID vaccine denialism, Trump election fraud lies, and a host of other increasingly unhinged conspiracy theory obsessions. In a conversation with Josh Seps, released this week on his own podcast, Harris went further still, naming and shaming certain IDW figures for practicing a new religion of contrarianism and conspiracy thinking. While the group had once been united against what Harris called the woke mind virus, Harris now says he's confounded by certain behavior among that squad, such as Brett Weinstein doing 100 episodes on his podcast in a row on the terrors of the mRNA vaccines and the sinister, shadowy cabal of people who've suppressed the information about ivermectin. It's completely crazy. Harris referred to a number of IDWers as smart people who now say that the most qualified experts on many questions, whether you're talking about what wars to fight or what medicines to give your kids, have been captured by sinister influences of power or such comprehensively bad incentives that basically everyone you should have been able to trust yesterday is now wrong about very important topics, but the outlier voices shrieking in the wilderness are right about all of them, no matter how much they may seem like crackpots. Some of his former allies have gone so far through the conspiratorial looking glass. Harris says that they'll start telling you how they were denied a Nobel Prize. Harris and Seps both acknowledge their belief that some of this conspiracy theorizing is fueled by failures of critical institutions. Harris goes on to say, when you see information being politicized and truly reputable people are being silenced or ignored or shadow banned on Twitter, it's catnip for anyone who wants to connect all of the dots in a way that seems sinister. The crazy interpretation is that this is all being orchestrated by some star chamber somewhere at Davos, and this is all about a comprehensive effort to get people to bend the knee to increasingly stringent misuses of power. He cited IDW commentator Majid Nawaz's obsession with every COVID policy, softening us up for the Orwellian boot that would never stop stomping on our faces. I just think that's bonkers. But Harris saved his most strident criticisms for Dave Rubin. Rubin has frequently said that his political awakening was inspired by watching Harris and Ben Affleck argue about Islam. Harris was subsequently the first guest on Rubin's show. In short, Rubin's origin story as a public intellectual is linked to Harris. I interviewed Harris in 2018 for a Daily Beast feature on Rubin, and he was very complimentary. But Harris said Rubin was being captured by his audience. Fear of offending his right-wing viewer base, Harris said, was why the liberal Rubin would never criticize Trump for anything at all. Now in 2023, Harris says Rubin is the quintessential example of audience capture, going on to say, Rubin became far more cynical than I would have thought possible, and it's very depressing. He was a friend, he's not a friend anymore. Harris puts much of the blame on the influences of Twitter and Trump. The real Trump derangement syndrome was not to have seen how appalling and dangerous and deranging it was to have a person like this get anywhere near the Oval Office. But Harris leveled no criticism at Jordan Peterson, and Harris also didn't lump Joe Rogan in with the bonkers conspiracy types, despite what Rogan said recently. However, Harris stressed that all of the core IDW figures, there's less daylight between him and Eric and Brett Weinstein, but he has little to say about Eric's own conspiracy theories. Harris also said about Rubin that he has no career outside of Trumpistan. So as someone who was kind of into new atheism when I was like an older teenager, it's probably not surprising so much that Sam Harris is the one to kind of get out of it and criticize it from the sidelines. I think it's mainly because, as much as I think he's a terrible guy, he never struck me as like a grifter. Like, he genuinely believes everything he was saying, and in that way he's been pretty consistent. Like, he's always been a Western chauvinist, in my opinion. He's always been a racist as well. He's never struck me as a conspiracy theorist, even when he has like kind of endorsed things like Charles Murray's The Bell Curve, which has been widely debunked. It more like came from a place of, oh, look at these factual things about and statistics about this, it must be true. Like, that's his brain. It's all about statistics and facts and coming conclusions based on that. It's the way he often assesses police violence. Like, after George Floyd, I listened to him talk about it, and I don't know why. It was probably for a video, and he was basically reading out loads of statistics talking about how like the police weren't institutionally racist, because in certain cases the discrepancy between the violence they enact is pretty similar across the population or something like that. I forgot exactly what it was. And in his opinion, despite so much testimony from so many people around the country of how the police are racially motivated, and there is actually statistical evidence of that as well, he just didn't really want to believe it, right? So that's where he's kind of coming from. But when you believe the world through that lens, you're going to listen to scientific facts in regards to medicine, I guess, right? So you're not just going to start rejecting everything because you've suddenly believed in a global conspiracy theory where everyone wants to control you. Like, Majid Nawaz swapped being an extremist in terms of Islam for being some sort of conspiracy extremist, right? And that's not something Sam Harris is ever going to really entertain. Like, a lot of these people, I guess, have a bit more respect. Why he seems so critical of Dave Rubin is Dave Rubin has no self-respect, right? He's just a grifter. He just goes wherever the wind is blowing. Didn't like Donald Trump, loves Donald Trump, now doesn't like him again, and now it seems like with the intellectual dark web 2.0, he wants to get out of that as well, and that's why he's backing DeSantis and putting DeSantis in this. And it all revolves around people who don't like vaccines having conversations, but it might be a gateway out of, oh, I've got to keep endorsing everything Trump kind of says, and I can never criticize Trump if I back out with Ron DeSantis, and people who aren't like traditional conservatives, maybe I can salvage my grift for a bit longer, and maybe I can be like the platform where all these people speak to each other or something like that. But yeah, it's pretty clear, like I said, the intellectual dark web was always intellectually bankrupt, ideologically inconsistent, and pretty incoherent, not to mention just like flat out wrong. And like it said in the original article about audience capture, that's what happened to most of these people, right? They fed them anti-left stories, so conservatives liked them. And then they would never criticize the right, so why would leftists ever join them, right? Even open-minded centrists could see through the grift, because it's like, why do you only criticize one side ever? And why is the biggest threat to civilization the left and not the right, who have the most institutional power? So that's kind of like where their failing was. And it's just funny, in the original article in 2018, Brett Weinstein talks about the dangers of audience capture based on getting all your revenue from social media. And then it's pretty clear that's what happened to most of these people, apart from maybe Jordan Peterson, who just seems to have gone insane. Like, I'm not joking. Like, he seems out of all of them to just have totally lost his mind. And if you go on his Twitter, that is good evidence of a guy who just seems addicted to multiple different things, and it makes him act in a very, very irrational way. So that is it for the video. Do you think the intellectual dark web 2.0 will succeed? Let me know down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.